Imagine this. The year is 453 AD. The shadow of Attila the Hun stretches across Europe like a storm cloud. Rome trembles at his name. Villages burn at his passing. He is known as the Scourge of God, a warlord who made emperors pay him tribute and kings bow their heads. And yet, his end would not come on the battlefield, beneath the clash of swords and the thunder of hooves. No, his death would be far stranger and far darker. It happened on his wedding night. Attila, already in his late 40s, was not a man who sought gentle romance. He had many wives, taken for power, for alliances, for pleasure. But this night was different. The woman's name was Ildiko. She was young, noble, and, according to later chroniclers, so breathtakingly beautiful that even Attila, the man who feared no army, was utterly captivated. The Huns prepared a feast, a wedding unlike any other. The halls shook with laughter, song, and drunken toasts. Goblets overflowed with mead and wine. Warriors slammed their fists on long wooden tables as musicians played wild, barbaric tunes. The air reeked of roasted meat, smoke, and sweat. Attila sat at the head of the feast, eyes glittering, a massive golden goblet in his hand. His face was flushed, his laughter booming like thunder. He raised his cup again and again, drinking deep, the veins in his forehead bulging. His people roared approval. The conqueror who had humbled half the world was marrying, and the night belonged to him. But as midnight crept in, the revelry began to fade. One by one, the warriors collapsed in drunken stupor. Fires burned low, and shadows danced on the walls. Attila and Ildiko withdrew to the bridal chamber, and there something terrible happened. By morning, the king of the Huns was dead. The chroniclers disagree on what exactly occurred. One version claims that Attila drank too much. His nose bled uncontrollably, and he drowned in his own blood as he slept. Another whispers something darker, that Ildiko herself killed him, plunging a blade into his chest at the behest of enemies who feared his next campaign. Think about it. The most feared warlord of his age, cut down not by armies, but in his own bed on his wedding night, a scene more fit for tragedy than history. When his men found him the next morning, the chamber was silent. Attila lay sprawled on the bed, blood soaking his face and beard. Ildiko, they said, sat trembling in the corner, her dress stained crimson. The feast turned to chaos. Warriors wailed like wolves. Others demanded blood, calling Ildiko a murderess, a spy. Some believed she was innocent, that Attila's death was the will of the gods. Others swore she had been Rome's weapon, planted to end the terror of the Hun. But one thing was certain. Attila the Hun, conqueror of Europe, was gone. And in his death, the empire he built began to collapse like a burning house. This is only the beginning. In the next part, we'll peel back the layers of this mystery, uncovering the strange rituals of the Huns, the paranoid whispers of Roman historians, and the terrifying funeral rites that followed. Because the story of Attila did not end with his death. In fact, the way his people buried him is darker and stranger than almost anything else from antiquity. The morning after Attila's death, terror spread through the camp like wildfire. Men who had once sworn they would follow him to the ends of the earth now stood in silence, trembling. They did not know if their king had been poisoned, betrayed, or struck down by the gods. What they did know was this: the earth itself seemed to mourn. They say the Huns wailed so loud that it echoed across the plains. Warriors slashed their faces with knives, letting their blood mingle with tears, believing it was unworthy to mourn such a man with soft weeping alone. The ground was streaked red with their grief. But what came next was stranger still. The Huns prepared a funeral that defied imagination. According to legend, they buried Attila in not one, but 3 coffins, the innermost of gold, the second of silver, the third of iron. Gold to honor him as a conqueror, silver to mark the tribute he had taken from kings and emperors, iron to symbolize the unbreakable weapons of the Hun. The grave was dug in secret. His body was carried by night, far from Roman eyes, into the wild lands where no outsider would find him. The men who carried him sang dirges, their voices low and guttural, trembling like wind across the steppes. And when the grave was sealed, the Huns did something chilling. They killed everyone who had helped dig it. Why? To keep the location of Attila's tomb forever hidden. No enemy would ever find his body. No thief would ever touch his treasures. His final resting place would remain a mystery, swallowed by the earth itself. Even today, historians and treasure hunters search in vain. Somewhere under the soil of Hungary, perhaps beneath a river or lost forest, lies the grave of Attila the Hun, untouched, unknown, perhaps cursed. But the rituals did not end there. The night after the burial, the Huns staged what chroniclers called the Strava, a funeral feast unlike any other. Warriors rode their horses in furious circles, singing war songs, brandishing swords, and crying out to the spirits of their ancestors. They believed Attila's soul was not gone. It galloped ahead of them, still leading them into the eternal battlefields of the afterlife. And yet, beneath all the chaos and blood, a quiet dread lingered. Some whispered that Attila had not truly died by accident. They said Ildico's hand, or perhaps Rome's, had struck him down. Others claimed it was a curse, that no man who had shed so much blood could die gently. The gods themselves, they said, demanded his life on his wedding night. Whatever the truth, his death left a void too great to fill. His sons quarreled, splitting the empire into fragments. The unity that had once made the Hun so unstoppable was shattered. Within a generation, their empire was gone, swept away like dust in the wind. But Attila remained, not in flesh, but in legend. The Romans had called him the Scourge of God, believing he was sent as punishment for their sins. The Germans told stories of him as a cursed warlord who wandered the earth long after death. Even today, his name carries the weight of terror and awe. And it all began with that one night, that wedding feast, that crimson dawn when the most feared man alive was found lifeless in his bridal chamber. Yet the story still has more shadows, because while his empire crumbled, whispers of betrayal and divine punishment followed the name of Ildico, the bride who survived the bloodied bed. Was she victim, assassin, or pawn? The truth remains as buried as Attila's grave. At the center of Attila's mysterious death stood one figure, his bride, Ildico. History remembers her only in fragments, a shadowy name whispered by Roman chroniclers. But in those fragments lies a story as haunting as the king's demise. On the night of their wedding, Attila had taken her as his new wife. He was not a young man anymore, but she was said to be strikingly beautiful, a woman of noble blood offered to the Hun as part of an alliance. To some, she was a prize, to others, a trap. When Attila's body was found the next morning, she was the only one alive in the chamber. She claimed the king had feasted and drunk heavily, then collapsed in the night. Blood had poured from his mouth and nose, drowning him in his sleep. That was her story. But the whispers began immediately. Roman writers hinted that she had been an unwilling bride, forced into the marriage. If that was true, had she struck back in vengeance? Could the fragile young woman have taken the life of the man who terrified half the world? Others whispered of poison. The Romans had much to gain from Attila's death. His armies had threatened their cities, drained their coffers with tribute, and left their empire trembling. What if Ildico had been their dagger in the dark, a bride sent to assassinate the Scourge of God? And yet there was another layer, darker, stranger. Some Hun warriors muttered that no mortal woman had killed Attila. They said the gods themselves had chosen that night to strike him down, using his new bride as a vessel. His death, they claimed, was divine punishment. After all, could the greatest conqueror of the steppes really be brought low by simple drunkenness? Ildico's fate is uncertain. Some sources suggest she vanished into obscurity, forgotten once the funeral was over. Others suggest she was cursed, her name spat by Huns who saw her as the cause of their empire's unraveling. But one detail clings to the story centuries later. The Roman historian Jordanes wrote that Attila died in the arms of his young wife. That image of the most feared man alive collapsing lifeless beside a trembling bride burned itself into history. It is both intimate and terrifying. The conqueror of empires, undone not on the battlefield, but in his own bed. And here lies the cruel poetry of it all. Attila had crushed kingdoms, burned cities, and carved his name into legend with fire and steel. Yet in the end, he was as vulnerable as any man. His death was not written in the clash of swords, but in silence, in shadows, and in suspicion. The Huns would carry his memory like a curse. But for Ildico, the woman at the center of this storm, history gave no redemption. Was she a victim, a traitor, a chosen hand of the gods? No one could say. Her silence echoes louder than her words ever could. And as Attila's body sank into the earth, buried under gold, silver, and iron, the image of his young widow lingered, a fragile, enigmatic figure, caught between love, fear, and legend. The morning after Attila's death, the steppe fell silent. Across the vast plains, riders galloped to spread the news. The great warlord, the Scourge of God, was gone, snuffed out in a single night, not by Roman swords or divine lightning, but in the stillness of his bridal chamber. The funeral that followed was unlike any in history. According to legend, his warriors rode in circles around his bier, slashing their faces so that the earth was soaked not only with his blood, but with theirs. They buried him in secrecy, sealing his body inside 3 coffins, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron, then killed every captive who had dug the grave, ensuring no living soul could reveal its location. To this day, no one knows where Attila lies, and yet the true burial began the moment his breath stopped. With Attila's passing, the Hun Empire fractured. His sons squabbled over the throne, jealousies and rivalries tearing them apart. Within a generation, the unstoppable tide of horsemen who had shaken Europe was broken, scattered like dust in the wind, all because one man was gone. Historians still debate the truth. Was Attila killed by Ildico's hand? poisoned by Romans, or struck down by his own overindulgence? The answers are lost in the smoke of time. But what matters more is what his death revealed, that even the most terrifying power can collapse overnight. For the Romans, Attila's end was proof that no conqueror is beyond fate. For the Huns, it was a curse, their godlike leader reduced to a mortal tragedy. And for the world, it became a timeless lesson. Empires are fragile, and the line between strength and ruin is thinner than a blade's edge. Imagine it. One man who could bend nations to his will, whose very name made cities surrender without a fight, felled not by armies, but by mystery, suspicion, and perhaps his own human weakness. In the end, Attila was not just a warlord, he was a mirror, reflecting the brutal truth of history, that no matter how high a man rises, he cannot escape the hand of destiny. And perhaps that is why his story still lingers, not just as a tale of conquest, but as a haunting reminder. Power is fleeting, fear is fragile, and even the scourge of God must one day fall.